There has to be a way out of here. I'll find it.
The Bad Batch has returned, and our theory from the very first episode of the show has been confirmed. Now it looks like Omega is a distant relative of Rey Skywalker, and I cannot wait to explain how. Welcome back to ScreenCrush, I'm REY, and this is all the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in the Bad Batch episodes 1, 2, and 3, Season 3. Oh, and also be sure to check out our Star Wars parody merch at our merch store, ScreenCrushmerch.com, where we design all this merch ourselves. We have our classic original trilogy tee, the prequel Apologist, Somehow Palpatine Returned, The Apprentice Lives, Hello There, Say No to Death Sticks, and many more. The link is below. So the title of this episode is Confined because it's both about Omega being confined in this space, but it's also about us, the audience, being confined in Mount Tantus with her. Like Omega, we do not get to leave this place during this episode. We begin the episode on the outskirts of the lab, in the atmosphere, and the action slowly pushes in, showing us the layers of security that are confining Omega and Crosshair. There's the storms in the atmosphere, the monsters outside the facility, the compound wall, layers of force fields, until we finally get to Omega's small, solitary cell. Now this is showing us how difficult it's going to be for her and Crosshair to escape the facility. This episode reminded me of the great Crosshair solo episodes, like the outstanding episode last year, The Outpost, where he frags his commanding officer.
He is expendable, as are you, Lieutenant.
The Bad Batch, in my mind, has always struggled to balance its huge ensemble cast in Season 1, and I think that the show is at its strongest when we get to really dive deep into a single character and sometimes see the other characters from their point of view. And I think it's very important that the first story in this season is to see Omega in prison because it establishes the stakes. Right now, the team is trying to reform their family and retire to space Greece, but this prison is what awaits them if they fail. The shuttle coming into the atmosphere is a Republic attack shuttle, like we saw all through the Clone Wars, and it's a precursor to the Emperor's Lambda-class shuttle that we saw in Return of the Jedi. Here we see the clone commandos, the more elite soldiers with glowing visors. Now I think that, along with those Black Ops clones we saw last season, these will be the last clones that the Empire retires, and also the hardest clones for Rex to turn against the Empire when it comes to the Great Clone Rebellion that I really hope is coming later in this season. Notice the officers calling in the shuttle wear the same helmets as the Death Star super laser gunners in A New Hope. Now, in A New Hope, their masks differentiated them from the other Imperials because this look was meant to mimic the look of a hangman's hood, because they destroyed Alderaan. But here, I think they picked the mask just because it looks cool. Yeah, man, that's the rule of cool. Now, you know we cover a lot of Star Wars on this channel, but I especially love when we get to cover animated Star Wars. I mean, animation has a special place in my heart because, you know, it connects me with my childhood.
Oh, is that why you're eating a candy bar?
Actually, Doug, this is not a candy bar. It's a blueberry magic spoon treat, and it's got 11 grams of protein and only 1 gram of sugar. And this is Honey Nut Cereal from Magic Spoon. They're the sponsor of this video. Real good. So Magic Spoon's been our partner for every season of The Bad Batch, and now it's become part of my watch tradition. Just like on Saturday mornings when I was a kid, I get to watch cartoons and eat this fun cereal. Except now I also have to take notes when I watch the shows.
Yeah, but that cereal looks like it's real sugary. Is it bad for you?
Dude, Magic Spoon tastes like all the cereals from my childhood, but it has no gluten, no soy, and there are 0 grams of sugar. But most importantly, it just tastes so good. Chew, chew, chew. With Magic Spoon, you can build your very own custom box from cocoa, fruity frosted, peanut butter, and maple waffle flavors, plus other awesome flavors including honey nut, blueberry muffin, cinnamon roll, birthday cake, and chocolate chip cookie. And now they've introduced 2 new treats. We have double chocolate and blueberry muffin. You can also add their marshmallow and chocolatey peanut butter cereal treats to your order, and each one of these bars has only 130 calories.
I see, so Magic Spoon fulfills your need for childlike nostalgia while also engaging with you on an adult level.
Exactly, but mostly it's just fun. Like, we may be grown-ups, but come on, be the grown-up you always wanted to be when you were a kid. Eat fun cereal and watch cartoons. It's perfect for a reluctant adult like myself. Magic Spoon is actually so confident in their product, it is backed with a 100% happiness guarantee. So if it is not for you, they will refund your money and you guys can part ways as friends. No one's feelings will be hurt. So to get $5 off your first order, click the link below or scan the QR code that's on screen right now and use the code ScreenCrush to get your $5 off, or go to magicspoon.com/ScreenCrush to get your deal today. Now, back to what I was saying.
So wait, where are they at again?
About this in a lot of past videos, so I'm not going to dive too far into it. Mount Tantus is actually from the very first Expanded Universe series, The Heir to the Empire trilogy by Timothy Zahn. It's a cloning facility inside a mountain where Grand Admiral Thrawn was going to create a new clone trooper army to staff these Lost Republic ships that he found in hyperspace. In the new canon, it's become a Black Ops cloning facility that Palpatine created, separate from Kamino, where he could begin research into Project Necromancer.
Oh, what's Project Necrodancer?
Necromancer. It means to use magic to raise the dead. Like, you all remember how Palpatine was cloned out of nowhere in Rise of Skywalker.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
So these episodes are explaining why that happened, how that happened. They're trying to create a cloned body of Palpatine that can actually sustain midi-chlorians. It's the same reason Gideon wanted Grogu's blood in The Mandalorian.
I highly doubt we'll find a donor with a higher M count, though.
In fact, Project Necromancer was also referenced in Season 3 of that show.
Project Necromancer is in place for that.
Wow, so this is just a lot of hours to explain one line from a movie.
I know, but to be fair, they did spell a lot of this out in Rise of Skywalker.
The Emperor is dead.
Dark science. Cloning. Secrets only the Sith knew.
Well, anyways, that's what they're trying to do with the cloning. I'll go into more detail on it later. So notice that Omega is back to wearing this arm patch. The same patch that the cloner Dr. Pershing wore in The Mandalorian and that the clone trainees wore on Kamino. And you know what? Star Wars canon has never explained exactly what that symbol means, but we here at the channel have always assumed that it was worn by members of a cloning guild, since like every profession in Star Wars works on a medieval system of like guilds. But now I'm wondering if this is a patch that is always worn by clones, and that Pershing was also a clone. Or, as we theorized last season, he could be the son of the clone scientist Emery, because Pershing did mention growing up in his mother's lab.
My mother was a doctor in the town where I grew up.
In the hallway, we see an RA-7 protocol droid like we first saw in the Jalla Sandcrawler and A New Hope. And we also see these floating medical droids like AZ-1, Omega's favorite droid who first appeared in the Clone Wars. In the lab, the Arabesh here reads biometric data status, and then Omega goes to deliver samples to Nala Se, who of course we first met in the Clone Wars episode Shadow of Malevolence way back in Season 1. In her lab, notice this hologram sound. It's the same one we heard in the original trilogy. Nala Se deletes Omega's samples to keep them off the books, and at the end of episode 3, we get confirmation that indeed Omega's sample was actually the perfect match to provide a stable M count.
The clone sample supported a positive M count transfer with no degradation from the specimen.
So, what this means is that Omega has this rare clone DNA that actually allows you to transfer midi-chlorians and make a Force-sensitive clone. Now, we predicted this all the way back in our very first breakdown of this show, after the Kaminoans hinted that Omega was a special kind of clone.
The remaining clones of Squad 99 have escaped, along with Omega.
Until the Empire's intentions are made clear, say nothing.
At the time, we said that maybe the Kaminoans were on the sly trying to learn how to clone Jedi so they could have their own Force-sensitive clone army.
So wait, midi-chlorians. Yeah. What is that again?
Well, I'll let Qui-Gon explain it.
Midi-chlorians are a microscopic life form that resides within all living cells. Without the midi-chlorians, life could not exist, and we would have no knowledge of the Force.
Now, look, I know we all hate the idea of midi-chlorians because it makes the Force so literal and physical, but I do like the way that Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni have used that concept to show how Palpatine's #1 goal was to achieve what he promised Anakin.
He could even keep the ones he cared about from dying.
It's also fitting because the Force itself is very natural. It is a gift of life.
It's an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us and penetrates us. It binds the galaxy together.
While Palpatine is trying to usurp that natural way of things in order to cheat death, and the dark side of the Force draws its power from death and destruction, so it naturally destroys living tissue instead of preserving it. So cloning is the only way that Palpatine could ever use the dark side of the Force to live forever. You see, Star Wars has always had this macro clash between nature and technology. Even in A New Hope, the Rebels have their headquarters in a green, lush jungle, while the Imperials are in a cold, metallic battle station. So extending this struggle into the realm of cloning of the Force is a natural extension of this idea. So when they say that Rey is Palpatine's granddaughter, this is because one of his clones could not hold midi-chlorians, but his daughter, Rey, could. So it is possible that maybe in this series we're going to see the Empire acquire Omega's DNA, the DNA that will eventually create the non-Force sensitive clone of Palpatine, Rey's dad, which then creates Rey. Now, Rey being a Palpatine is still, by far, the worst thing in Star Wars, and I will die on that hill. Anyways, notice how Nala Se is walking slightly bowed, as opposed to gracefully gliding like Kaminoans usually move. It's like either she's getting older or imprisonment is really starting to affect her spirits. Notice how the testing equipment works the samples operating clockwise, which in episode 3 becomes a literal ticking clock for Omega to escape the facility before her sample is tested. Jimmy Simpson returns to voice the great character Dr. Hemlock, walking Nala Se through these barriers of Rey shields, with the red Rey shield of course symbolizing the evil of the Sith, and the multiple barriers representing the multiple clones and copies of Palpatine that they'll be creating. It's also a device to show even more layers of imprisonment in this facility to tell us how impossible it's going to be for Omega to escape. Omega feeds the Lurka and befriends it. Again, Star Wars is always about about the natural world overtaking the technological world, so we see her making friends with animals. The droid working in the stables is an SE2 model like we first saw here in Rogue One. And of course, this is a mouse droid like we first saw in A New Hope. And I loved how later in episode 3, we actually see Omega kick one of these things to keep it from following her into the elevator. Crosshair and the other prisoners are wearing white jumpsuits. Now, you will probably remember that we also saw these in the excellent prison arc of the show Andor.
There is one way out.
And they were also seen in the show Star Wars Rebels. But what you may not know is that these costumes are very similar to what the workers wore in George Lucas's first feature, THX 1138. In that movie, human workers are drugged by robots until they essentially become extensions of the machines. So Lucas's fascination with this push and pull between the natural and unnatural has been present since his very first film. Omega's captors forbid her to have any personal items, which is also very similar to how in THX, the humans are not allowed to have any personal attachments or possessions. Later in the episode, we see that she has made a new version of her stuffed Tuca cat Lula that Wrecker originally gave her back in season 1. Emery tells Omega,
"How come I never saw you on Camino?"
Because I was sent elsewhere.
Which means that as soon as the Kaminoans started to create a clone army, Palpatine immediately started his own Black Ops facility to continue his own research so he could achieve immortality. In a way, it's like part 3 of his master plan. Number 1, take over the Republic. Number 2, eliminate the Jedi. Number 3, become immortal. He probably actually was grooming Anakin as an apprentice because he was conceived by the midichlorians and had such great raw genetic material.
Sir Palpatine is Mr. Sinister and Anakin is Scott Summers.
That's what Star Wars is going with. So the med kit on the wall here in Arabesh reads First Aid. Omega still wants to rescue Crosshair even though he betrayed the squad, but remember, she had a connection with him in season 1 that I thought at the time implied she was Force sensitive.
I know it's not your fault.
Now maybe that Force sensitivity is what allows Omega to feel a connection to the Lurka, but after she sets it free, Hemlock basically tells her that her efforts were pointless and she only weakened the animal with her sentimentality. Of course, in a couple episodes, we're going to find out that he was wrong. But the episode ends with the Betcha howling outside, a sign that the Empire cannot hold the natural forces at bay forever. And as we'll talk about later in the video, Omega ends up being set free by love, a power that is antithetical to the dark side of the Force. Episode 2 is called Paths Unknown, which refers to the search for Omega, but also it refers to the young clones on this planet. They don't know what's next. They've been so preoccupied with surviving that they don't yet know how to really live. The episode starts at the headquarters of Issa DeRay's Deveronian crime syndicate. Now remember, her son, Roland Durand, briefly took over Sid's operation in season 1. Then he got in trouble with the Pikes, who cut off one of his horns as punishment for losing their shipment of spice. So the headquarters here is created very much to look like a European city, with a cathedral or a castle at its center on a hill surrounded by the walls and homes that kind of flow outward from it. It's a way of telling us this is where true power lives. So I know a lot of you saw the trapdoor here at the Durand Palace and immediately thought of this. But actually, the having an audience with an evil ruler with a trapdoor trope goes all the way back to the Flash Gordon serials that inspired Star Wars to begin with. Wrecker and Hunter have tracked down the Pike who took Roland's horn. So we're kind of getting an interesting power dynamic here. The Pikes are a massive crime syndicate that controls all the spice mines of Kessel. Presumably, they're also the people behind the death sticks this guy was selling.
You wanna buy some death sticks?
Just like our Say No to Death Stick shirt at our merch store. And in this episode, we hear that the Durand family is also getting weaker.
This syndicate has grown weak under your rule, Lady Durand.
So maybe, like in the background this season, we'll see more of this war between the Pikes and Issa Durand play out. But they also say the capture can't be traced back to the Deveronians, so who really knows?
Hey, Issa Durand sounds kind of familiar. Who is that?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Issa Durand is actually voiced by screen legend Angelica Houston.
Oh, that's so cool.
It really is. And you know, seeing just Wrecker and Hunter on this mission really hits home just how much of a blow this team has taken. Echo is off with Rex, helping other clones fight the Empire.
The clones will need our help now more than ever. I can't turn my back on them.
Tech is dead, Crosshair and Omega are captured, and so the team is really down to just 2 guys. And then the shot of the Marauder landing in the jungle seems like it's a copy of a very similar shot in the Phantom Menace when the Trade Federation armies are landing on Naboo. Wrecker points out that the last time they didn't wait for backup, they lost Tech. And I actually expect that we'll keep seeing Hunter make more and more reckless decisions like this throughout the season as they try to find Omega. Wrecker says,
"It smells like rancid Jotaz out here."
And a Jotaz is a monster on the planet Zepho, which you fight in the game Fallen Order. When When they arrive on the planet, they say that it was hit by an orbital bombardment, just like Kamino was at the end of season 1. And then they find these Lord of the Flies clone kids who escaped and are now searching for their purpose in life. And I thought this was a nice touch thematically with the rest of the episode. These young clones no longer have a purpose. Like the Bad Batch, they are free and no longer have to obey this clone maxim.
Good soldiers follow orders.
But the thing about freedom is, in many ways, it's more difficult than being trapped in a system of control. When you're free, you have to make your own decisions and decide what kind of man you want to be. The clones face a moral dilemma in this episode. Do they save themselves or do they help others? This is the question at the center of this show. The Bad Batch have to decide. What will they do with their newfound freedom? Live a happy life in space Greece? Fight the Empire or fight for the Empire? The clones say they thought they were getting additional training, but
they made us prisoners. Took samples of our blood.
And this is very similar to the prisoners in Andor, where the inmates thought that they were working off their sentence when they were essentially slave labor. And all those themes are shown with the kids in this episode. So, remember when the clone kid gave this warning?
And don't touch the vines.
Now, these slither vines are not natural to this world. The Empire cloned them as a potential defense mechanism. Again, we're seeing how the Empire, messing with the natural order, causes problems for them. And last season, we also saw them kidnap animals like the Zillo Beast to replicate its armor to withstand lightsaber attacks. So it's interesting to see that the Empire's gene slicing isn't just limited to trying to give Palpatine immortality.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should.
Wrecker grabs Gonky to use as a power source because remember, Gonk droids are essentially just large walking batteries that scream when you torture them.
What is my purpose?
You pass butter.
Oh my god.
And I loved this sequence of them on the base. Like the Zillo Beast episode last season, this is claustrophobic creature horror, like the first Alien movie. In fact, the little vine monster even looks like a baby face hugger. Now the environment, the gas mask, and these creepy vines even seem inspired by The Last of Us, the game more than the TV show, because in the game you have to wear a gas mask to prevent spores from infecting you with the cordyceps fungus. And of course, this entire sequence with a monster lurking below and tentacles popping up also seems like a nod to the Dianoga in A New Hope. The kids easily break onto the Bad Batch ship because hot wiring, expensive machinery in Star Wars is always super easy.
What, like it's hard?
And one of them says,
check this out. A DC-17.
So this is the standard issue blaster issued to all clones that the cadets probably trained with when they were on Kamino. Then we see the full tentacle monster, and it's this Lovecraftian horror from the depths with no face and all teeth and no eyes. And it proves that the Sarlacc was way scarier when it just looked like a Dune popcorn bucket. They say they narrowed the base search to a single sector, which in most Star Wars video games like Star Wars Rebellion, a sector is just 10 planets, so that really does narrow it down for them. And they take it down with an explosive to the mouth, similar to how Boba Fett got his revenge on the Sarlacc. And at the end of the episode, Hunter sees Wrecker laughing with the boys. Now this connects to this shot from earlier when he saw Omega's doll and he looked away because he was sad. But now he's seeing the ship filled with the sounds of laughter and children again, so it gives him hope. And now, let's talk about episode 3, The Shadows of Tantus. First of all, I love seeing how Imperial architecture looks similar across like different eras, like how the cone-shaped structure here is very similar to the Death Star core in Return of the Jedi, or even the structure that housed the tractor beam in A New Hope. Now, as I talked about earlier, this episode does a great job of establishing a ticking clock. Nala Se knows that Omega's DNA can hold midichlorians because that's what Nala Se mined Omega's DNA to do.
That's the point.
So, as the machine rotates clockwise, Omega's sample ticks closer to midnight. Also, check this out. The reading here that measures the midichlorian count looks just like the one that Obi-Wan used to look at Anakin's DNA in The Phantom Menace. And then the Emperor arrives, escorted by V-Wing starfighters, the precursor to the TIE fighters. Just like in Return of the Jedi, he arrives on a single shuttle and not with like a giant massive fleet. Now this is because both Mount Tantus and the second Death Star were secret operations, and he needed to arrive with a small escort to preserve that secrecy.
That's why the president doesn't go to Area 51.
It is? How do you know that?
Continue.
When his shuttle arrives, we get this creepy choral music similar to his main theme in Return of the Jedi.
Emperor.
Everything is proceeding as I have foreseen.
Except in the Bad Batch, it sounds like it's the beginning to that leitmotif, like Palpatine's rule is just getting warmed up. And later in this episode, we hear the full theme.
It is imperative that this facility remain hidden and secure.
But Palpatine is greeted by a full division just like he was in Return of the Jedi. And he is accompanied by his Imperial Guards, who we also first saw in Return of the Jedi. Remember when we thought we were going to get to see them fight in Revenge of the Sith, and instead Yoda just did this? God, that was awesome. Now, he is voiced once again by Ian McDiarmid after Tim Curry voiced the character for a few seasons of the Clone Wars. And man, what a gig this has turned out to be for Ian McDiarmid. Originally, he was just hired to be in makeup to play the Emperor, and George Lucas planned on dubbing another character for the voice, until he heard Ian McDiarmid's performance, and ever since then, Ian McDiarmid has been Palpatine. Also, here's a small detail. The grading of Crosshair's prison cell is the same shape as the map of the prison facility, a subtle way of showing how the facility itself is like a large set of prison bars. Palpatine says,
"They lack the vision that we possess."
Which is a pretty typical Palpa burn that we heard him hurl at Luke Skywalker.
Then pay the price for your lack of vision.
Crosshair tries to escape by saying,
"Unlock this cell."
Much like the Jedi mind trick that Rey used in The Force Awakens.
You will remove these restraints.
Now notice how Crosshair's hand has developed a slight tremor.
Your hand's getting worse.
Now, for his special skill, being a marksman, nothing could be worse, because a sharpshooter needs to have a steady hand. Now, this could all be in his head. I mean, he's having a crisis of faith in himself. Or, I think it's more likely that his clone DNA is beginning to break down. Like, wouldn't it be a bittersweet ending for this show if Omega ends up safe and sound, but the Bad Batch's DNA begins to break down because they were never designed to outlast the war? Hemlock shows the Emperor this cloning chamber, which of course are all lit with like Sith red lighting. And I gotta think, this is gonna be really similar to the facility that we ended up seeing on Exegol in The Rise of Skywalker. Maybe we'll see that one of his early clone subjects will actually be Snoke, finally explaining where the hell the jar of Snokes came from. After Omega and Crosshair escape, he works out that to get away, they can follow the Emperor's flight path. And I love villain irony like this, where the bad guy carelessly causes their own undoing.
You played yourself, dog.
Had Palpatine not visited the facility, Omega and Crosshair would have not been able to find the shuttle, which might have led to Omega being captured and Palpatine being cloned much sooner in the Star Wars timeline. When the Empire is scanning for them, this sound,
We're getting an odd energy surge in Sector 4.
is just like the scanning devices the Rebel speeders used on Hoth. But the ship engines themselves sound like the Republic gunships and troop transports we first heard in Attack of the Clones.
Hold on!
And, as we discussed earlier, Omega befriending the Lurka, or in other words, trusting in nature, ends up saving their lives. So now, we have an interesting situation here where Crosshair and Omega will be out looking for Hunter and the Bad Batch, when Hunter might end up on Mount Tantus when Omega's not even there. It may actually be the entire season before we see all these characters finally reunite. And by the way, the planet's hologram at the end looks very similar to the Endor hologram in Return of the Jedi. That movie takes place about 25 years in the future from here, and it makes sense that the Rebels would be forced to use older technology. And now, the full force of the Empire is going to be brought to bear to hunt down Omega.
Hunt.
At first, I just thought Nala Se was going to die, and that would prevent the Empire from hunting down the Bad Batch because they could no longer use Omega's DNA. But now that they know about Omega's M count, I think she's either going to have to fake her death or actually die.
Oh no!
And once again, thanks to Magic Spoon for sponsoring this video. Just a reminder, scan this QR code or click our link below and use the code ScreenCrush for $5 off, or go to magicspoon.com/ScreenCrush to get your discount today. So what did you guys think about the Bad Batch premiere? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below or at me on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe and smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.